Mr. Rajendran from Trust, my own colleagues, Professor Ilango, Dr. Jirida, Nirmala, Dr. Rajavel, and guest faculties, Dr. Selvamani, Dr. Suresh, Dr. Karthikeyan, Milton, and Pugal Jodi. And my dear participants, a very good afternoon to one and all who have joined for this online training program, 3 days online training program on the counseling as a profession and effective practices. Of course, we have the halfway through. We have completed the 50% of the course today morning, and I hope you are all enjoying the sessions, right? In a very effective manner, because that's what we have put it as the word, effective practices, right? And today we have Professor Catherine Barbas with us from the Belgium, and she is a clinical psychologist and works as a psychotherapist in a private practice in Belgium, Austin, and she has a PhD in clinical psychology of Kent University, and teaches as an affiliated professor in Hovest University of Applied Science, Bruges, and Kent University, Belgium, especially on the topic of intimate relationship and how to involve the broader context in the treatment of anxiety disorder and trauma. So I think she has a very good experience in the field of clinical psychology, and of course the universe is having this pandemic of COVID-19, and in this situation how the counseling is going to be effective. So that's the topic today, and the topic of today is effective counseling in Corona times, a challenge. So that was the thing, and I'm happy in welcoming Professor Catherine, who have taken much of the efforts, right? So welcome, Professor Catherine. It is over to you. I think you'll be having a very good sessions today, while many participants are joining, and I wish to say that we have through Google Meet and also YouTube streaming. It's also been live. It is being done live, and people are also watching on both the Google platform and as well as YouTube. I hope that everyone will have a very fruitful, and I wish you all the best. So it's over to Professor Catherine Barbas for an elaborate discussion on the effective in counseling in Corona times, a challenge. And thank you. Welcome. Unmute. It's not hearing. You have to unmute.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Now it's audible.
So we can start. First, I want to start to thank the organizing committee and you, Professor, for the kind invitation, and also my sincere gratitude to you and your colleagues for bringing us counselors and psychotherapists together in these difficult times. I think we also have a great need for connection and support in moments where India, just as Belgium, is severely affected by the COVID-19 virus. So the main central question I want to address today in the webinar is counseling in Corona times, a challenge, and more specifically, what is the target of our interventions? So maybe I start with a little story. So in February, I traveled with my husband to New Zealand. And when I came back after 6 weeks, it was the 23rd of March, I landed in a total different country. There were no cars, no people, no on the street. Most shops were closed, bars and restaurants were closed, schools were closed, parents worked online from home. We were just allowed to walk, out to cycle in our bubble. A bubble is the persons with whom you live. We were not allowed to see our kids. We were not allowed to see grandkids. no kisses and hugs, no friends, no social contacts. And on television, Corona news, amount of sick people, infected people, a lot of deaths. So we do not have a normal life. And there are even serious doubts if we can return to the way of living that we used to. Also in my practice, or the practical psychology practices, counseling practices were closed. We were not able to see any clients anymore face to face. We didn't have face-to-face contacts. The only contacts were online. And we saw that a lot of patients didn't want to have these contacts online. And others didn't have the possibility to have an online connection due to poor internet or lack of computer or phone or whatsoever. So when I came back and I saw all this, I felt a kind of a shock because I wanted to help, to do something, but I didn't have any idea how I could be helpful. What could I do as a counselor in a private practice? So I want to present to you some ideas that help me and other colleagues as well to have a better understanding of what is happening. Because when you think, when you say, wow, when you have a shock, the first step is, what is this? And afterwards you have the sense, what can I do then? What is this next step to take? So first, what is happening? The next slide, please. Can I have the slide of my presentation?
Yeah.
Thank you.
It will be presented. It will be presented right now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Can you able to see?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah.
And maybe you can go to the next slide, please.
Okay.
So I had some figures put together, so you can see here the infections, the recovered patients, and the death that we knew in Belgium, in India, and worldwide. So COVID-19 has officially been declared as a disaster because of the worldwide spread and the number of infected people and deaths. Next slide, please. So disasters, yes, you can push a bit further, yes. COVID-19 can also be seen as a collective disaster, a trauma, just as bombing, a flood, a hurricane. So I explain myself a bit further. Next slide, please. The next slide, please. Okay. It is the former one. Yeah, thank you. So a disaster is defined as an event or series of events that implies a threat of dying, of being injured. So the main difference with a hurricane or a flood is that with COVID-19, the event is not limited in time. The virus is still active and there is no immediate solution. So the experience of a disaster becomes traumatic when it taxes our ability to cope and result in fear, horror, or helplessness. So next slide, please. Okay. So the research on disaster management points at different phases. And I'm sure you will recognize some of the phases I will describe. The pre-disaster phase is characterized by fear and uncertainty. The specific reactions of a community depend on the type of disasters. So disasters without causes, without warning, causes feelings of vulnerability and lack of security. Disasters with a warning, like the COVID-19 virus, can cause guilt of self-blame for people who failed to follow the warnings and who were infected. So this phase can be short and may be long as several months. It's like the virus, it is still, the pre-disaster phase is still there. So afterwards, you see we have the impact phase. In the case of the virus, the reaction can range from shock, like I described, to panic. So there is an initial disbelief followed by a focus on self-preservation and family protection. Then we have the heroic phase. I think we were in Belgium, we were in that phase, I think, a few weeks ago. So the heroic phase is the we will survive phase. During this phase, there is a sense of altruism and solidarity. And people show rescue behaviors. They want to help each other. And these behaviors are sometimes risky, because in this period of heroism that we will survive together, we see that risk management is often poor. The honeymoon phase is characterized by a dramatic shift in emotion. During this phase, disaster management is already available, community bonding occurs, and there is optimism that everything will return to normal quickly. After that comes the disillusion phase. This is in sharp contrast with the honeymoon phase. The realization of the impact of what happened and the stress continue to take its toll. And this enhances disappointment in actions of the government. Because as the larger community returns to business as usual, like when the lockdown has been finished in Belgium, the gap between what people need and expect and the limited assistance can enhance feeling of abandonment and anger. So there is a lot, in Belgium, there is a lot of blaming, looking for who is responsible for what happens. There was a shortage of masks, there was a shortage of gloves, of other protection material. So people are looking from who is to blame. These phases can last for months and is often extended by trigger events. So the next trigger event that can be important here is, for example, a second COVID-19 spread. Or about in Portugal at this moment, Lisbon is again in a lockdown. There's 1 million people are in a lockdown they don't know how many times. Lockdown is really staying inside, have no contacts, and also control if you do this. There's a huge restriction of freedom. So the reconstruction phase comes almost after, mostly after 1 year. But we don't know when it will come with this virus, in the virus. And it is characterized, this phase, by an overall feeling of recovery. Individuals and communities rebuild their lives and people adjust to a new normal while they are continuing to grieve losses. In the sense of COVID, because we don't have medication, we don't have medication yet to prevent it. So it's very unsure when this phase will take place. We are living in rather exceptional times. Yeah, you can show the next slide. So Gersens, a Dutch psychiatrist and specialized in disaster management, adds a fifth phase to the model. And the fifth phase is the bankruptcy. Because the economy shows a sharp decline in growth. There is less consumption, there's a closure of factories and shops, people lose their jobs, property increases. So, and this is a worldwide phenomenon. So the way to survive these adversities, who are still to come, is by putting all our efforts together and look for solidarity and try to keep solidarity in living. So if we would shut off and do it all by ourselves, this is not really a solution. So next slide. So after this, so I tried a bit to understand in which phase we were in Belgium. I have the impression that there was a lot of mixture we're going back forwards in the phases and then again backwards, depending on what is happening. So, but the next question, and this is also a problem, for me it was also a problem, should we immediately give individual treatment to people who have complaints? So next slide, please. So, for example, do we start a trauma group for the medical and nursing staff of a hospital? Or do we voluntarily give therapy to corona victims? And when these questions also are problems, and I will tell you why. Next slide, please. When we give individual trauma intervention, leads to three problems. So one big problem is that 30 to 40% of the population has mental health issues. And stress reactions, fear, rumination, sleeping problems, loneliness, social problems, poverty. And we are a limited amount of counselors and caregivers. So there will never be enough people, caregivers, to help all these persons who need help. So that is one huge problem that we are facing. The second problem is that psychological debriefing was put forward as an intervention for groups to help them to counter PTSD. And it's well known now and well researched that it can be counterproductive. That is not the good thing to do, but I will get into that a bit later. And the third problem is a problem of inappropriately pathologizing and over-medicalizing true normal reactions on what we see as an abnormal situation. So, and we'll also get into this a bit later. Next slide, please. Yeah. And the third problem is then by giving individual treat, there is a problem that we can overlook or ignore resilience. The resilience of clients. So several studies on post-traumatic stress reaction and recovery reveal 4 different trajectories. You see that in this slide, we see that over the time, there's almost, here's the follow-up was of over 6 years, that most of the people recover. Only 4% get worse or chronic, and 8% need more time to recover. So the conclusion from this study was that mental health outcomes cannot necessarily be predicted on the basis of severity of the injury. So the injury severity score, as measured by the CAPS here, was not a consistent predictor of subsequent outcome. Thus here, when we see this, next slide, please. We can conclude that we are dealing with a collective crisis, and a collective crisis is fundamentally different of an individual trauma. So collective crises like the COVID-19 pandemic have an impact as well on the individual as on the community. So we need interventions that tap into the 2 levels. So next slide, please. Yeah, so what is the challenge for counselors? So do we need to diminish the emotional memories of collective crisis? Must we help social communities to help themselves during a crisis? That is, for me, I found it extremely important questions. So what do we do? What is important in these times to do as a counselor? So next slide. Yeah. So as a counselor, a psychotherapist, I was mostly trained in individual models. So what helped me tremendously to have a broader, to have a need to take a broader picture was a more social model. Social model like social capital and the relationship with resilience. And this opened really my perspective. So that's why I really want to take some time to get into this model. That is, next slide, please. Yeah, okay. We'll do it gradually. So I'm the one who's managing the PowerPoint. When I say tap, then you can tap. Okay, so I will take you a bit in the multi-level model, which is also resilience model. Tap. Yeah, okay. So we have the relationship with how is a collective trauma, tap please, yeah, connected to post-traumatic stress, yeah, tap, yeah. So we know that from the individual model of trauma, tap, yeah, you can do it, yeah, that there are 3 elements that are important: the emotional load of the event, the coping efforts that people do, have coping skills, self-efficacy, and also the social support. So we know tap. I show the arrows now. Yeah, fantastic. So you see the whole model. This is an individual model, so that we all well know, I think. So we know that when there is a lot of emotional load, a lack of coping, a lack of social support, that the traumatic symptoms, the PTSD symptoms will be more severe. Okay, so I will add this. Now we add the social model. Yes, you can tap. I didn't know the social model, but I will explain to you what it means. So it's a social capital model. So we have there the structural social capital that describes the interpersonal configuration and linkages between people or units. So you can call it a sort of community. We have also the cognitive social capital. That is the shared languages, the codes and the narratives, the shared values, attitudes, and belief of a group of a community. Yeah, tap. Okay, and we have the collective efficacy. Collective efficacy is the sense that one belongs to a group that is likely to experience positive outcomes. So we see that the collective efficacy, and now it becomes interesting, has a direct relationship on social support. Tap. Yeah, you see the arrows appear. Tap, please. Next, yeah. So you see, and there is also a linkage between the cognitive social capital and the coping efforts. What does it mean? So we see that competent communities promote perceptions of self-efficacy among their members. So, and also they foster also the perception that others are available to provide support. So the belief that others can be called upon for support attenuates the perception of vulnerability and motivates individuals to engage in adaptive activities they might otherwise see as risky. Yes, tap on the last arrow. And as a result, people in communities with high social capital suffer less from PTSD. And they rely more on the community because they rely more on the community than on their proper psychological resources. So we conclude here that intervention that directly strengthened social capital also influence positive mental health. So for me, it was a really, maybe for you counselors, maybe this model is well known. For me, it was rather a support in a sense that I felt that I was a little piece in a whole network together with other people who can do this kind of interventions. And eventually, maybe I thought, maybe I can do this myself and look what I can do to promote this social capital, to promote links between people, to promote the collective efficacy. So, okay, the next slide, please. Yeah, so you see. This is the article. I put it in because it was for me a rather important insight, this multi-level model. So you can also find it or ask the authors. So the importance of solidarity, and this is also an important something. The importance of community reactions and support is illustrated in these cartoons. So the motto is stop the spread. And alternative to flatten the curve. You see, no collective response. The curve, the spread is not affected at all. Yes, next, please. So, short time. So what we see, there is the spread is controlled, but after a time, it starts all over again. So we in Belgium, we are very afraid for the next COVID spread and phase, but we can tackle this if we are if people understand that we have to stay together and continue to do what we are doing, washing our hands, using masks, 1.5 meter distance, and so on. So next, please. And here we have, when we have a strong collective response, is the best case scenario, where is really the spread can really be controlled. That is what we see now also in Belgium, that people that as a result of these collective responses, we can now stop the lockdown and have more freedom. But we have to continue to do this. And that's the most important part, and also a difficult one, because we see that people now experience more freedom, and they have forgotten all the things that are more important. So they are not following the instructions that's as well as before. So next, please. Okay. Now, we can ask ourselves what are the elements of trauma interventions that are important. And I know that you all know these 5 elements. And these elements are important as well in individual as in collective interventions. Maybe I will tap into them briefly. So the sense of safety, it's the nature of disasters and mass failure and disasters that people are forced to respond to events that threaten their lives, their loved ones, or the things they most deeply value. So when people are confronted with ongoing threats of the magnitude of the COVID, they will respond naturally with physiological and neurobiological reactions that will result in fight, flight, or freeze behavior. So promoting safety can reduce these biological aspects of post-traumatic stress reactions. Moreover, when the threat continues, those who can maintain or reestablish a relative sense of safety have considerably lower risk of developing PTSD in the months following exposure than those who do not. And parallel to this physiological reaction, we also have cognitive processes that can inhibit recovery. By magnifying threats. Well, a central belief that is very counterproductive is that the world is completely dangerous. We have to be careful the whole time. Thus, important is that corrective information is given in the aftermath of the trauma to ensure that individuals can appraise future threat in a more realistic manner. This consistent with this view, evidence also indicates that people who are likely to develop disorders, PTSD disorders, are more likely to exaggerate future risk. So in most anxiety disorders, the perception of danger in the future is the most important thing to handle. So what we also need, what can also help is correct information, psychoeducation, correct information by the media, and also some leadership. Leadership can help because it creates a sense of control and mastery, and leaders know what they are doing. However, media, or have a very important role in this, can also have a very negative impact because of too much negative messages or by giving very ambiguous messages. Okay. The second point is normalization and soothing. So we see with the COVID virus some extreme emotions, but we saw also after some days or week, these emotions have to calm down. And one way to calm down emotion is to avoid things. So in the beginning, it can be adaptive, but it becomes problematic if the avoidance increases in numbers and types. So research shows that anxiety management is a key psychotherapeutic treatment for patients. I talked also about enhancing a sense of collective efficacy. So the sense that one belongs to a group is likely to experience to a group that is likely to experience positive outcomes enhances individual efficacy. So it is very important to central goal of all successful treatments to promote positive self-efficacy. So if we keep in mind that most victims were living normal lives prior to the disaster, to the COVID disaster, we can see that the task may be more one of reminding them of their efficacy, of what they can do themselves, than of building efficacy where there was none. I hope I'm not overwhelming you with all this information. Okay. In the enhancing the self of collective efficacy, I want to point at two factors who are also important. That is to have the belief that one can be, that there is that you can cope with the situation. You also need behavioral repertoires and skills. If you don't have this, then we see that successful actions will be compromised. The second aspect of the self and collective efficacy that is often ignored is that empowerment without resources is counterproductive and demoralizing. So research on disasters has repeatedly found that those who lost the most personal, social, and economic resources are the most devastated by mass trauma. And those who are able to sustain the resources have the best ability to recover. So what we maybe are facing, I don't know, with the bankruptcy and the economic situation who will become worse, is that there will be sort of fight of war around to have resources, or to keep the resources, instead of building up the solidarity. So that's a big question, what will happen. So creating connection. So successful interventions need really to identify those who lack social support and those who are more socially isolated, or whose support system might provide undermining messages like blaming, minimalization. So, and keeping people connected, training people how to access support and providing support are important. So it's also important to preserve social structures that help keep communities intact and preserve rules, order, and social supervision. The last element is hope. Hope is very important, and hope is affected by the pandemic. This is because of we see that people have a shattered worldview, and that's normal because we are not trained to handle such kind of situations. The pandemic is totally new. Nobody, even one in Belgium, and I know how it was in India, where we were not ever confronted in our lifetime with this kind of pandemic of virus infection. So we are a lot of people felt helpless. So hope, without knowledge about how to cope, it's natural that hope diminishes. And how hope is defined is also dependent on the culture. In our country, it's more action-oriented. That's why we were losing hope so quickly, because we didn't know what to do. In other countries, people rely more on religion and on the belief that there will be more or less positive outcome in the future. However, in confrontation with a disaster, it is critical to help individuals to get their lives back in place. Also by very concrete measures, was housing, employment, relocation, replacement of household goods, paying of insurance reimbursements. That is what's happening in Belgium for the moment. Is the government is really looking how to economically support people who are really severely affected. And the group that is most affected are the poor people who live in poverty. On the whole, we can say that community on a group or large-scale intervention may be more impactful and more efficient than individual intervention. So it makes us a bit, as counselor, maybe a bit humble to see that maybe we can do something, but that there is a lot of other interventions on a large scale that are needed. So also people do a lot of themselves, and I want to present some of these spontaneous initiatives. The next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So we have this is all together against Corona. So the sign of the hand was very central in our country. Also, we saw a lot of young people who were helping elderly who were living at homes or needed to do. They went to shops they did shopping for them. Then they keep company and so further on. We also have a lot of gratitude messages, like the one for the garbage collectors and the postmen, because these people were still working when everyone was at home. And also at last, another please, tap. Yeah. So when we had to stay in our homes, every night at 8 o'clock, people came out to give a big applause to everyone who helped to tackle and to cope with the virus. For the nurses, the medical staff, and everyone else, shopkeepers, people worked in shops, really to express our gratitude. And it is still going on. And for the reactions for the people who were working in these difficult times, they felt very supported and very it gives them new strength to continue their task. Yes, the next one, please. So what to do? So as counselors, what is the importance of all this evidence for our work as counselors? So what is our focus? What do our client needs? And how will we address these needs? So I'm not a bit more on our, we will start a bit more on our profession. So I think the first point is that we are maybe too much trained in tackle individual problems, to work with individual problems. So one thing that I learned, and also my colleagues, we've discussed about with colleagues, was that maybe we have to think more in terms of individual needs. What do people need when they come to see us? So it can be that they need safety, or it can be that they need to be recognized in what they need. They can need, for example, information, or maybe they can need financial support, or social support. Maybe they need hope. And then hearing from a professional that, for example, that their reactions when they come, that these are normal reactions on abnormal situation. It can also give them hope against distressing thoughts. I'm going to become crazy, I'm inadequate, and my reaction is a sign that I can't take it. So normalizing these responses can help us enormously, because people don't always have the insight into what is happening. Secondly, I think it's important that we realize, and also they point at that we're only a tiny element in the client's context. So important is to use this context more in our interventions. Next slide, please. So I found the context is a connected ecosystem. Yes, can you tap? Yeah, and then you see, tap please. Yeah, you can see that the healthcare services, you can see that the healthcare services are at the other side, at the other layer of support. So the most important layer is the layer of the family. This families are also the main source of social capital within the community and the main provider of mental health care after disasters, especially among rural populations, but also, so what I want to say is that the family is an important target to care for, and also a primary target for intervention. Yes, the other, next. So now we come, keeping all these elements in mind. So what can we do? What are possible interventions that recognize the importance of the social context and the resilience of the individual clients? And I want to present you a case. It's naturally a case, a Belgian case, but I hope that you will recognize it, or tap, please. Yeah. So in a nursing home for elderly people, 2 of the 20 residents died of COVID-19 and 5 are ill. So the caretakers have known the residents for a long time, and there is a lot of grief and anxiety in both staff and residents. The manager is especially concerned about 2 staff members. Linda is very sad and stressed after seeing an old man choking to death. And Ahmed is extremely anxious of being contaminated. So the question is, what would you do? I would like to discuss with you this question and hear your responses, but it's not really possible, so I will get a bit further on. Yes, next slide, please. So the first target, what we learned, the first target is not the individual, the first target is the group. And what are group interventions? First, it is important to promote mutual support and togetherness for caregivers. So the first time is not asking Linda to come to your office, the first thing to do with the manager is to see how he installs support and togetherness. Is it possible in the unit? How is it expressed? Is it enough? So that is really a very important, because people can help themselves and each other very well if there is a possibility to do this. So, okay. So the second point is peer support. What happened in Belgium is that at a certain point there were a lot of deaths and infected people in elderly homes. So they sent trained nurses who worked on the intensive care of hospitals to these homes to help their colleagues, helping them to cope more effectively with the virus, and also helping them emotionally and socially. And this was very, very effective. There was a lot of good comments on this intervention. And the third intervention you can do, the more specialized, is the group support. Yes, next slide, please. So, a group support, what are the ingredients? Group support is not the same as debriefing, but I will tap into this further. So, group support is directed by a professional counselor, and his role is to create a safe space that stimulates expression of needs, and especially recognition of these needs. The second point is to give psychoeducation on responses on crisis. So, you know what we already said, to put psychoeducation in such a term that people understand that the reactions that they have are normal reactions on abnormal situation. And also to stimulate natural recovery by discussing what the team themselves can do to help each other. So you're not giving strategies, you're really helping the team to find them in themselves. So that is really the resilient part of the thing. Also important is that the group also have a sort of attention and focus of malfunctioning, on the detection of malfunctioning, that they take care of each other. So instead of ignoring it or putting it aside. And what's also important is to discuss follow-up actions. So when you do group support, what's important is, how do we continue? What do you need now? What can I do for you next? It's not that you can set several group support activities, but you better sometimes to do one intervention and then afterwards following it up. And when it's needed again, that people can contact you again. Okay. So next slide, please. So there is difference with debriefing. So in psychological debriefing, every participant is invited to discuss in detail the event and especially their emotions in a group. So there is a lot of evidence that show that group debriefing may promote the development of PTSD instead of tackling it. And that is why is this? Because when you express your emotions fully in a group, it also stimulates the anxiety in the other participants, and it augments it. So this is not really the first good thing to do. Yes. And next slide, please. So, and target 2 is what about the individual? So we have the group, we have me. Yes. Next slide. Okay. So the task of a counselor, I think in these times, is a kind of psychological triage. He looks at specific complaints and symptoms, anxiety, sleeping problems, avoidance behavior, extreme fears of the future. He looks at personal concerns of worries, like I'm not the one I used to be. I do not recognize myself anymore. And he listened also to concerns about the client in the environment. So it's very important to know what are these concerns and why this person is sent to me. And the evaluation is about the general dysfunctioning, the degree of avoidance and fear here is important. The inability also to handle reactions of others. For example, the person is not capable anymore to cope with even minimal situations, we mean minimal stress situations, and also a lack of support. It's also important to look at this. So, okay, the next slide, please. So, ingredients of when you decide to do individual care, what is then the first choice? The first choice is to address the natural recovery capacity of the client. So, yes, next slide. Slide, please. So, if we invite the first step is telling the story. So, what happens? When did it happen? When did it happen? What did you do? And what happened then? It's like playing a movie. You really want to stimulate that it's concrete without pushing the person. Sometimes people are not able to tell the story. So it's very useful to be respectful and let that be for the moment. So you focus on behavioral sequences and not on emotions. That's just the first point. You use past tense verbs, as the story is about the past, except naturally if the person is still in it. But the traumatic event is always in the past. And we see that clients who comes to see us, for them, the past is the present. So we really want to make difference in that, differentiate. We empathize without dramatizing. We acknowledge the burden. That's it. And then summarize what you heard. Okay. Next. So in the case of Linda, you saw that he was choking and there was nothing you could do. You are upset that you have still these images and that they have such a huge impact on you and your life. You feel guilty and you try to deal with all this by avoiding work and everything linked to it. Yes, the next step. The next step is to give psychoeducation, normalizing, externalizing what's happened, it's not your fault, and giving hope. Yes, next slide, please. So in the case of Linda, what you experience are normal reactions on abnormal situations. This was a situation that was totally new for you, unexpected and unpredictable. Therefore, it's normal that you didn't know what to do and how to cope. For example, you open the door and a man points a gun at you. This situation is not in your repertoire, and there is little time to react. And what happens then? Your body goes in alarm, fight, flight, or freeze mode. But important is that thinking is switched off so that you can focus on survival. Then you are not able to make rational choices. There is no time to think, just to act. So in this case, you make a kind of a difference between then and now. And then the next step is, what would be helpful? What are things that you did before that help you to cope with stressful situations? Sharing and social contact, that was very difficult in the lockdown. A lot of people went online, but it's not the same. It is a problem with this. Being in nature, meditation, yoga can help. Also, doing sports. So it's very important to look for things that are already available to the clients. Yes, next please. And monitoring and wakeful watching. In the case of Linda, we expect that the complaints will automatically subside over time and that you will be able to go to work. Do you have confidence in the process or do you prefer that we meet again to check how you are doing? So the monitoring and the watchful waiting is about looking how the evolution of the symptoms and the complaints. And after 8 to 2 weeks, if there is an increase in complaints, a lack of social network support, a lack of coping, and when the person really has all the PTSD criteria, then there is a possibility to go more to trauma treatment, in a sense, to use EMDR or cognitive behavior strategies as exposure and so on. But even then, specialists really want that, really advises to wait, because they really believe that people can help themselves, and also it enhances the confidence in people's capacity to overcome difficult situations. Okay, I come to the last slide. So the take-home message after this long presentation. So there is the importance of supporting the broader context people living and targeting the natural capacity of people to heal. So second, we as a professional, we have to work together, and we have to support each other in these times and stimulate each other to embrace the bigger picture. It will imply maybe that we need to develop new ways of working together and new ways to help clients as inside and outside our offices. And I want to end with the citation of Horace. Horace is a Greek philosopher. Can I have the form? Yeah, and then I will stop it. So adversity has the effect of eliciting talents which in prosperous circumstances would have lain dormant. And with this, I want to end. I have thanks to my colleagues for the Inspire webinar I followed myself in these times. And also, thank you for your attention and your patience.
Thank you, Professor Catherine. That's what really a lucid presentation you have given, vivid picture about what are the different challenges as a counselor we are facing during the pandemic situation. So really that's a wonderful lecture you have, really covered, almost a 360-degree approach on giving the how about the clinical, and how as a clinical psychologist, how the counseling can be done in a better manner with quite with the case studies and example. That is a really fascinating lecture given by you, madam. Thank you. And let us take up a few questions in the chat box. It is now, dear participant, now it is open for your question and answer. And I hope that Professor Catherine will be able to answer some of the questions. Can I help you, Professor Catherine, in reading out the questions, the chat box?
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
I saw
there is one.
Yeah, please. If you say the questions, I can maybe respond.
Okay. That will be helpful to you. Thank you. And please tell us the effective way to counseling school children through online platforms. How the online platform can be effectively utilized for the school children during this lockdown period.
Yeah, I think helping children in this pandemic, because children are also afraid, I think you have to address the whole family, to include the family as well, because the main source of safety, what we talked about, is in the family. So if the family is capable to give safety to the kids and to help the kid handle and cope with the situation, then it is also one way of doing this. But naturally, you can have parents who are also afraid. And we know that anxiety is infectious. If one part of the family is, one member of the family is anxious, it spreads also in the rest of the family. So I think the family intervention with kids in these moments are the most important things to do. So I don't see individual treatment of children in these times. It depends naturally. If you have a child in therapy that was already in therapy before the pandemic, then you can continue, but I don't think that your therapy of your counseling will be the same.
Yeah,
So,
fine.
and what about online counseling? Okay, online counseling is a possible method, but as I mentioned before, that it's a new method. We are not used to online counseling, to do online, have online contacts with people. So even for the counselors and for the clients, it's very weird. And we, as experience, we saw that in Belgium, that people who were already before the COVID pandemic were already in treatment didn't want the online treatment with their counselor. They wanted to wait until the practice was open again. They really want to have face-to-face contacts. The people who were new and wanted help in this period online, and the help was online, continue to have online care. So because they found it a good way to be helped. So, and research show that online help can be as effective as face-to-face contact.
How to be a positive when we know the COVID-19 will stay for us for a long, with no potential vaccine available in near times. So how we can be positive? Yeah.
How to be positive? I think you saw also the curve I showed with the different phases.
Not COVID positive, yeah.
Yeah, we will. I think we must be realistic. We can't be positive the whole time. We will also have moments that we are all also have no despair and that we are anxious or fear for our people, for our family, or for our kids or grandkids. I think these moments are there. We are as counselors, we're also humans. So actually, if you're very afraid and you are confronted with a client who's also afraid, I think it's important to recognize these feelings and really put it in a perspective that it is normal to feel to have this kind of feelings in such abnormal situation we are living. The situation is not normal. Sometimes we think, oh yes, it's finished, it's gone, but it isn't. So I think that also is important to have a really, as a counselor, have a kind of genuinity, yeah, and to say what we feel and we are just humans as they are. So the problem, you also asked a question about poverty and poor people, isn't it? Or was there not a question about that? Online help for poor people? Was that not a question, or have I misunderstood it?
Yeah, fine. Okay, that's social distancing has impacted the relationship between the people. How was that affected people mentally? Because now during the pandemic situation, so almost all the country, they more emphasize on the social distancing, isn't it? Because of social distancing, he says that has impacted people relationship. So how this would affect mentally?
That is a very good question and a difficult issue, because as people, as humans, we are social beings. So the social distance is for us, it's really a very difficult situation. People were restricted in their homes. They didn't have to have any contact with other ones. And what we saw happening, and that really was beautiful, that even when people were locked up in their houses, they showed they came out on their balconies and outside their doors, and they were applauding or singing. In some neighborhoods, some people were getting a whole concert. Every house, and they were singing songs, playing music. Some people danced before the front door. So, I think a lot of spontaneous initiatives raised up that tackled this need to have social contacts, even on a distance.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, fine.
But so
How
we
to
have a bit of
counsel?
belief that these things can happen. Yeah.
Of course. Next question is that how to counsel those who have lost their job and those who are struggling? Because due to the lockdown and pandemic situation, I know that this is prevailing all over the country, world. So the loss of job due to the lockdown, and how what would be the, because I know that it is a very elaborate thing, very difficult also. But how in a very crisp manner, how we can able to do counseling for the person who lost their job?
You asked me I find it personally I will be very honest with you. In this kind of periods when someone loses his job and also his income and gets into poverty, me as a counselor, I felt helpless. Even helpless as the person who lost his people, because what he needs is resources. And he needs resources that I can't give him. Maybe if I can look with him, where can he find these resources? What are possible things, practical things that I can do for him so that he can find his way in all the, must I say, in all the things that are available. I don't know, in Belgium, there are a lot of social workers also who takes all kind of initiatives, also volunteers, for example, to serve meals, to help people with documents or papers of. So, but for the moment in Belgium, people haven't. There are jobs who are already lost, but it's just starting up. So the worst is still to come. So I don't know as a counselor exactly what we can do in this moment. I don't know.
Yeah, right. I know that. Okay, I do understand the thing. And there is one question: what is PTSD? Of course, that is. I think they would have asked for the expansion, post-traumatic stress disorder. And the next one is how to cope up with the feelings of hopelessness and uncertainty during COVID-19. Of course, I think in the course of things we have answered this question. But if you want to if you want to answer this question, of course you are welcome. How to cope up with the feelings of hopelessness and uncertainty?
Yeah, I think the first thing to do is to recognize that these feelings are legitimate. In these moments, there are a lot of people who feel helpless and hopeless and really are in despair, especially if they have lost family members or if they have lost the jobs of everything is changing. So how we tackle this, or how we can, there is and that is why the collectivity is important. We need to believe ourselves that there is some kind of hope possible, that we will get out of this together.
Yeah.
So that is the main message. So and the more we believe it ourselves that this is possible, the better also we can transmit it to our clients, because they will say, oh, my counselor have said maybe it's helpless, but there will become better times. We don't know when, but we are together in this. You're not alone in this. We are in Belgium, 30 million people are affected by this. Worldwide, 8 million people are affected by this. You're not the only one. We are in this together. And we have to stand there and to do things together to tackle this.
Fine.
So there is an invitation to again see the broad picture.
Yeah, fine. So that's another important question. So what do you see as a long-term strategies for fighting this pandemic And do you feel like it will adequately prepare us for the next? So, what would be your long-term strategies for fighting the pandemic? And do you feel like it will adequately prepare us for the next? Because he predicts that there might be some other pandemic in the
I
years
think
to come. Maybe another 100 years, maybe whatever thing. Of course, there the situation may change. But the thing is that as of now, what would be the long-term strategies?
so. I think the strategy to handle the pandemic can never be an individual strategy. Can never be an individual. It's not an individual issue. It's a community issue. That's my first point. So the government also have to put a strategy forward how to handle this. And that's what I saw that, for example, having a leader that is inspiring and can help and motivate people to do what's necessary to cope with this virus is very important. So the media, the government, the policymakers, specialists, experts, all these are strong, are needed to get us out of here, out of what is happening. So that is one point. A second point is that there must be resources given to people who are affected. If there are no resources available, and maybe that's the whole problem in India, then you have a lot of people and category of social classes who are more in despair than before. And we always see that poverty, people who are poor at the lower class of the society are more affected by the virus and has less strategies to fight it. So these people need more support. So that's one thing. If we want to go forward as a society, at another side, I think the things that we can handle to cope with the virus are no more clear. And there are simple things that we can do: wash our hands, also keeping distance 1.5 meters, disinfecting things, wearing a mask when there are crowds. So these simple things, people can do this. So this is a way of coping. It's a bit of enhancing their self-efficacy by doing this. But there is also one problem with that. That is that people don't do always what is healthy. So a big problem here, and that is what researchers are looking at, is to motivate. How can we motivate people to follow this guidelines further in the project? Because there is some expectation that at a certain point people will say, no, it's over, up. We don't need the distance, we don't need the disinfection, we don't need the masks. So that is the most important thing. And that's what we see in Belgium for this moment. So especially with youngsters, the young people have enough of being restricted, being limited. They want to be free, they want to move, they want to party, they want to go out. And it's just in these, we know that the virus spread is more present when there are a lot of people together. So I don't know. And even when there is a new, and the experts say that it will become possibly a new spread of the virus again in the fall. So we're already expecting it. But the point is, naturally, will it come? So it's very weird times to live in, to expect something that will come, but is not already there. So it makes anxious. We experience collective anxiety. And if it comes, what will happen then? So I think it would be a great challenge to keep themselves in place and really to believe that we can come out of it. So, and as an individual, I think to follow the guidelines. I'm I realized that I'm more than 60, so I realized that I'm a risk, that I belong to the risk group. I don't have any other health problems, God thank. So a lot of people who are elderly are a bit, must I say, put in a category of risk people who need to be protected. It's really a weird feeling because young people protect the elderly. I think it's in India the same. They don't want to get them infected. You don't want them to die. And at the other side, yeah, it feels very strange. So we live in abnormal times. It's the only thing I can say. And I think it's important that we continue to realize this.
Oh, yeah, thank
We
you.
are living on the moon. We don't know the moon.
Yeah. So in addition to what you said, the risk factors and other things, how to handle the overflowing of information regarding COVID-19, and which has more of negative effect. As you said, everywhere if you tune on switch on the TV or the government information, everywhere there was overflowing information. And in fact, it has frightened the people so much about the COVID-19, maybe because of the lack of medicine or lack of the medicine. That's a very important thing, right? And why, how we can able to handle the overflowing of information.
Oei, de klank valt weg. I don't hear you very well. I think the connection is a bit troubled.
Yeah, okay. Now let me repeat it.
Can you repeat maybe what you
how we are going to handle the overflowing of information regarding COVID-19? Because when you turn on the TV and everywhere the government also just propagating the how we can make. They're cautioning about COVID-19. So in that, it's which has given more negative effect. So how we can able to handle this overflowing of information, and can we make it more positive, positive information? More, it has to be on the positive connotation rather than a negative effect.
Well, it's you point there at an important point. That is that negative information helps only for a short while. So there are two things that happens with a lot of negative information. People become more anxious, or they don't believe it at all. So there's more extreme reactions, and I think it's very important. That's the question about the motivation. We know that negative information doesn't motivate people on the long term. So we have to look for other kind of motivation. And that is really a subject of research. It will be interesting to research this and to tackle this bit as a topic. What we see is, what I suggest to clients individually, is that they monitor their, must I say, that they don't look at the television the whole day. Because in Belgium, when you get up with corona, and you go to sleep with corona. It's there, at a certain point there was no other things going on except this. Yeah. So you have to protect yourself as well. So I think it's use your proper strength, and it's good sometimes not to see things, not to look at things. In order to motivate yourself to continue in a more positive way. The media also showed nice initiatives of people. So like the singing on the street, the music, the dancing, the clapping. What also happened is that in Austin, for example, at 8 o'clock in the evening, all the church bells were ringing. So as a sign of, yes, we are in this together, and we can manage this. So this can also be a very good thing to tell each other about positive things that you can do as a community. The gratitude, expressing gratitude, all the kind of little things that I said. To have an eye for your neighbor. a lot of people say that they didn't know their neighbors before, and now they have a close contact from one balcony to another, but they know who they are. So they know who the neighbors are. So I think also this is important. But I don't know if in India how it's presented there on the television.
Yeah, people are afraid of things. Many. That's what they have asked the question. Yeah. So and because also another important thing related to this thing is that, yeah, please have water. Yeah, no problem. How to help the client in addressing the social stigma towards corona victims, because now people are afraid of approaching, so maybe with the corona victims. So how we are going to address the social stigma?
Yeah. The people who are infected. The social stigma is about people who had the coronavirus, I think, huh? Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's very important, I think, that the virus is everywhere. The virus, the only purpose of the virus is to be reproductive. So he wants to jump from one person to another without limits in color, race, age. It's an uncontrollable something. So if you are affected by a virus, then okay, then it's not your fault. It's everywhere around us. No, it's important to and people then can say, but maybe I didn't, it was stupid of me to go to this, having done this. Okay, they learn something. That's a good point. But the infection itself can happen everywhere, anywhere, even if you take good care. So I think there's a social stigma can be changed by giving good information. By really give effective and good information that my English is not that good. That takes the guilt away from the person. It's not its fault. You know, it's something that happens. That is.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes that can help to give good information to. For example, we have in in Europe also political leaders who had corona. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of England, has corona. He was very ill. So that also puts, the Prime Minister of England, he can also be ill. Okay. So that gives also, that does something also with people. Also, we have some famous sportsmen who had corona. So it's everywhere. Everyone can have it.
Yeah. So how, because as you said, many world people have the fearfulness towards the corona. They are fear about because when they become more aged, so they have that fear towards corona. How we can overcome that fear?
How we can overcome the fear? I think that's the main point to tackle in counseling, and the fear is about the future. I will be sick. When I'm sick, I will die. So it's shown that a lot of people have corona and doesn't know that they have it. And only a little part of them becomes so ill that they need intensive care. So it's a disease you can't control, but it's most of people recover from it. It's like I showed on the figures that people can see, okay, There's a lot of infected people, but there's also a lot of people who recover from this. To decatastrophe, thus we have to decatastrophe by giving good information, I think. This catastrophizing is not a rumination, is not a helpful issue here. And for the future, we don't know what will help. So what we see here is that if you have an uncertainty about the future, it can help to see how can I cope with this uncertainty? How can I cope with this loss of control? And there are some, we see in Belgium, for example, that a lot of people follow online classes of meditation, do online yoga, go into nature and to be quiet and be on themselves, or do sports. So it's a way to focus on the present and not to look too far forward. Because when we look forward, we don't know what will happen. We really don't know. So that's with this COVID thing, that is something that's difficult. We live in special times.
Thank you. So let us have a last question of the session, right? I think we have taken much of your time. And we are nearing 5:30. And are you in the line? Yeah, please. How to counsel a person worried about the future who financially stability is going down? Because they are financially now, you can see that instability is going on due to the COVID-19 situation, loss of job. Of course, that leads to the financial instability. In that situation, how we can able to counsel the person? Because many people are worried about how to counsel this kind of people.
Yeah. I think I really would, if you have an organization for counselors, I think now it's the moment to ask your government to do something, to support initiatives that are and interventions that are proven efficient.
Yeah, of course, our government has given a 20 lakhs crores.
What do you say?
20 lakhs crores been announced for the economical stability.
Okay. So what they do in Belgium now, I heard that they will they will give more money, that they will free more money for counselors and psychotherapy families and clients that I have. Said, oh, I'm feeling much better after the lockdown. It was so quiet. I just couldn't be in my bubble. There was no expectations. There was no stress. Everything was calm. There were no cars. So people really sometimes enjoyed the fact that there was no stress and no obligations. It's also learns us something about our society and where we live in. Our society is not always that, must I say, healthy for everyone. There was a lot of burnout and depression in our country, but it's also inflicted by the strains that's laid on people. So that is also sometimes I don't know, but there will be more money for counselors to help people, so that they don't have to pay for a consultation. That is I read it in the newspaper 2 days ago.
Free counseling.
That's good news.
Free counseling. Yeah, free counseling can be done. So
free counseling.
So thank you. Yeah, thank you.
They have to pay.
Please. So you want to add? Yeah, you can add. Okay, fine. I think we have taken much of your time for the past 1.5 hours, right? 1.5 hours, you have done a very wonderful session and clarifying all the queries that is being asked. Almost 90% of the queries I've just made it, and that's a really you made it a 1 hour presentation and half an hour for Q&A. So that's a really interesting. So thank you very much for joining us. And so you know that we have for the betterment of participant, we have an MOU with the Howard University. So that's what we brought Professor Catherine, Professor Pat, and I think that Mr. Rajendran, right from through Trust, he has able to do this MOU, and other people also, Meerut and other people also. I thank you very much. Now, let me just hand over the session to.
I also I express my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Catherine and also other staff member of Pat and Meet and Matthew. Also, Dr. Mangal and the other team of Department of Social Work, Bharathidasan University.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now it's over to my colleague, Dr. Nirmala, for concluding remarks and vote of thanks.
Thank you, Professor Mangleshwaran, sir. On behalf of the Department of Social Work, Bharathidasan University, I would like to thank our resource person, Dr. Catherine Barbes, Professor in Applied Psychology, Howard University, Belgium. It was really an analytical, comprehensive, evaluative, experience-based presentation in an inspiring manner. It was really a wonderful session we had. I would like to highlight few points on your presentation. It was well started with the statistical information with regard to COVID-19 cases in Belgium. It was impressive picture. And the phases of disasters was also explained in a diagrammatical presentation, such as pre-disaster phase, impact phase, heroic, honeymoon, disillusionment, construction. So in each and every phase, what is the state of mind of the people was well explained. And the emotional reactions of the people also was explained. Multi-level model and resilience was really informative and interesting, also thought-provoking for us. The diagram was well explained, and the important point stressed by Professor Catherine Barbes was promoting social capital and self-efficacy is more important. And the 5 elements of a trauma intervention also explained, such as sense of safety, normalization, enhancing the sense of collective efficacy, creating connectedness and hope. And Professor Catherine pointed out the need for community and group intervention, group level intervention. And at the same time, the point stressed here is that intervention at a large scale are needed, because COVID-19 has affected a huge number of population all over the world. All the countries are suffering. So large scale intervention is a need of the hour to help the people. And the spontaneous initiatives in Belgium during lockdown explained was enlightening us. And what to do in Corona times. It was also explained with individual problems and how to approach individuals, how to take care of their needs, how to serve their needs was well explained. And the connected ecosystem was really interesting and very well explained also. The intervention in the impact phase was very much impressive with the case presentation, and how intervention can be done also was explained. The ingredients, that is the 4 steps of individual care was explained. The step 1 as telling the story, step 2 psychoeducation, step 3 promoting natural recovery, step 4 monitoring and watchful waiting. So, and also the checklist of the indications for trauma treatment was highlighted. So thank you very much, Professor Catherine, for a wonderful presentation, and also for answering the questions, a lot of questions. As my head of the department, Professor Mangleshwaran sir explained, told that it is many questions came out, and almost all the questions you have answered in a very interesting way. So it was very much impressive. And I would like to thank my head of the department, Professor Mangleshwaran, for organizing this webinar, online course on this counseling, which is a need of the hour, because most of the participants are practitioners and students. So definitely it will be very much useful with the updated information on counseling. And so I thank you, sir. I thank Professor P. Ilango, senior professor in our department, a syndicate member of a university, for his support always. And I thank my colleagues, Dr. Jerida and Dr. Rajavel, for their presence and support. I thank the teaching assistants of our department, Dr. Suresh Kumar and Dr. Karthikeyan, Dr. Selvamani, the technical team, Dr. Selvamani, Mr. Milton, PhD scholar, Mr. Leone, scholar, and Mr. Pugal Jodi of first year MSW. So I thank the participants for your overwhelming response and your support in all our webinars. And so once again, I thank all the participants and our resource person, Dr. Catherine. I thank Mr. Rajendran sir for bringing this resource person from Hobart University. So thank you, sir. Thank you once again. Thank you.
So, Catherine, yeah, thank you. So, thanks for joining.